Hi everyone, I'm Diana at Sew in Common. Welcome to this episode of the Quilting Library. So glad that you're with me today. This week we are going to talk about this block called either the Convex Block, or I also found another name for it called the Mother's Choice. Now I've chosen to do it in two colors. Sometimes the Mother's Choice block is done in 3 colors, but it really doesn't matter. The block is the same. I like the 2-color idea on this one. I'm going to give you measurements for the block. If you make this size block and back it and quilt it and bind it, it makes a great little wall hanging if you have a small entryway space, or it can also make a great little table topper. You could also put 4 of these together for a really nice sized wall hanging, or I think 9 of them would make a nice throw size. I'm going to measure this real quick for you. Yeah, it's an 18-inch square by the time it's all done. Yeah, 18-inch square by the time it's all done, by the time it's all bound. So you're going to need, if you're going to follow along with me today, 2 fabrics, a print and a solid, or a light and a dark, or a tiny print and a solid, something like that. We are going to end up making the biggest sewing part of this block is making half square triangles. You're going to end up making 24 of them, but we're going to make them 2 at a time. So it's going to go by a lot quicker than it seems. So let me, before I give you sizes, I'm going to slide my fabrics over. I'm going to put the overhead camera on, try to get this completed one so that you can see it. So we can talk a little bit about the construction of it. So let's flip the camera. Okay, let me bring this out a little bit. Yeah, we're pretty close. Dave, my husband, was not quite able to get the camera hung from the ceiling this week. We are both currently in a production of The Music Man, Meredith Willson's musical, about a little town in Iowa called River City, actually based on a real town called Mason City, Iowa. And this is my 3rd production of Music Man, but it's my husband's first, and he is building the sets. And so he and I are both gone pretty much every night of the week. And so he was not able to get help me get the camera rehung, but we're getting there. I have to give him some time on that one. I don't want to rush him, but I want to talk to you briefly about the construction of this block because it's really rather simple. It's basically squares and half square triangles, and that's it. Your center here is 1 block, so there's no piecing for this. All of these 4 or 8, I guess, 8 squares around the block to make it look like it's on point are half square triangles. Pretty easy. And then out here, what makes your star points are also half square triangles. So you're not doing any flippy corners. You're not doing any flying geese units, anything like that. We're just working with simple half square triangles and blocks. So these 4 background blocks in the cream are solid squares, and the 4 in the corner on the outer edges are also squares. So very simple. All righty. If you want to get your pen and paper ready, I'm going to give you some measurements now. You're going to need, like I said, a background and a print, or a tiny background and a larger print, or a tiny print. You know that a lot of times it's kind of hard to see. There you go. I use these fabrics that have the teeniest little print on them. So from a distance, that really reads as a solid, that's perfectly fine for use on this type of a block. So your center square here is going to be your print fabric, what you choose to be your print fabric, and it is going to be one square that is cut at 6.5 inches square. So 6.5 inches all the way around. Then we have A squares and B squares. Your A squares are going to be your background. They're going to be what ends up making, let me just unfold the completed one. They're going to end up making the star pattern itself, which I guess I call it the background fabric. I suppose you could consider that the main fabric and this the background, but for the purposes of our video, the A fabric square will be your background or your solid or your tiny print, whatever you choose there. And you're going to need 12 4-inch squares that will eventually get trimmed down. You're also going to need 12 B squares, which is your print that is going to match whatever you have chosen for your center. And those are also 4-inch squares. So 12 and 12, 24 4-inch squares in total. And all of these squares become your half square triangles, okay? And then you are also going to need a D and E square. Now this is going to be the same fabric as your A and B squares, but you're only going to need 4 of each one, 4E and 4D, and they are going to be 3.5-inch squares. So 4 3.5-inch E squares, 4 3.5-inch D squares. So that's pretty simple. Let's bring all of our fabrics back in again, and I'll just run through them one more time. 1 6.5-inch square, that is your main print fabric, which will be your center. 12 4-inch A squares, 12 4-inch B squares, 4 3.5-inch D squares, and 4 3.5-inch E squares. Easy peasy. Now, what you'll need to do to start, like I said, the biggest part of this is going to be making your half square triangles. Set our B squares here for now. You want to take all of your A squares. You want to flip them all over. Now, if it's a solid, right, it probably won't matter, but you want to, on the back of them, you want to mark all of them for making half square triangles 2 at a time. You may just make a solid line from diagonal to diagonal, and then you will sew a 1/4 inch to the left and a 1/4 inch to the right, or you can use, as I do, the magic ruler. Your magic ruler may look like this. Your magic ruler may look like this. I use the yellow one in the videos now because it's easier for you all to see. But you put that on the center line here on the diagonal and the diagonal point here, and you draw a line on each side, marking. And these are now the lines that I will sew on, okay? And so you want to do that to all 12 sets, or all 12 of your A blocks. Then I want you to bring in all of your B blocks, and I want you to make sets with your A and B blocks. All of them right sides together, okay? Now we're going to go over to the sewing machine. I'm going to flip the camera, and we're going to sew this block. I'm using a 2.0 stitch length, so a 2 stitch length. I'm using an 8012 Microtex needle. You can use any 8012 needle that you prefer, or any 7511 needle that you prefer. I am also using an Aurifil 50 weight dove gray thread, and I believe that number is 2600. I believe the Aurifil Dove Gray is 2,600. Let me check here. Yes, it's 2,600 if you're interested in that number. It's the main thread that I piece everything with. Sometimes I piece with the 2120 white, but not very often. I tend to piece with that if I've accidentally left it in the machine and I don't feel like changing it. So I'm just sewing directly down this line, and then I'm going to turn and sew directly down the other line. If you are sewing based on a center line, you will sew 1/4 of an inch to the left and 1/4 of an inch to the right. And you'll want to do this with all 12 of your block sets. I prepped the other 11 sets beforehand. That way I won't take up all of your time just doing set after set. But as you can see, that was pretty simple. Just clipping off any of my threads. Now we're going to go back around to the cutting table, and we're going to talk about cutting and trimming these squares up so that we come up with 24 half square triangles that are 3.5 inches. So let me flip the camera back again. Okay, so here we go. We have our half square triangles. You'll have your whole little stack of them. You want to take your quilting ruler, whatever ruler you use, and your rotary cutter. You could use scissors if you want. I find it easier to do a rotary cutter in this scenario. And so what I do is I take my 1/4 inch mark on my ruler and I lay it right on top of one of the sewn lines. I do the right side because I'm left-handed. If you're right-handed, you would lay it over here on the left side. Okay, that's just a handedness thing. But what that does when you lay that 1/4 inch right on that line, see, it lines up right on the point here and right on the point there. So you know you're slicing this in half right down the center. And if you're off a little bit, it won't make a difference. I just try to get them as accurate as I can. Now look, I have 2 half square triangles. I'm going to pre-cut my dog ears by coming in and making a slice like that. I'm not measuring, I'm just going at the very edge where my sewing begins and cutting in at an angle. The woman I learned this from is my friend Chris Thurgood from My Girlfriend's Quilt Shop. She calls this, I believe she calls this her Superman cut, because doesn't that look like Superman's crest in the middle of his chest? Or I could say it looks like a diamond with the facet on the edges. And we all know diamonds are a girl's best friend. That's what they say. Diamond happens to be my birthstone, so I guess for me it's kind of true, isn't it? Okay, I'm gonna get rid of my little dog ears, and I'm gonna grab my pressing mat. I've got my little Aliso, iron already. It's all nice and hot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my seam. And I like to use the Acorn Precision Piecing product to condition my seam. And by conditioning, I mean, it helps to make the seam super nice and flat. Here, let me get this back down here a little bit better. Please excuse the cough. So I'm gonna, whoops, actually, let's do it from the side because I want to press to the darker fabric. There we go. Now I'm flipping that over. Now look, because I pre-cut my dog ears, how it's perfect now. As soon as I press it, It's going to be ready to go. I don't have to worry about doing that. I don't know that it actually saves time in the end, but I like, when I flip that open, I like seeing that lovely little square there. And I'm going to just set that over there. I'm going to put my clapper on it. If you're wondering what a clapper is, go check out my very first Good Gadgets episode where I talk about tailor's clappers. They help absorb the heat of the iron, which cools your fabric and sets that nice flat seam. So the precision turning or piecing product helps get the seam nice and flat, but your tailor's clapper absorbs the heat and helps to set the seam in that flat position. Okay, and you're going to do this with every one of the sets that you sewed over at the sewing machine, and you're going to end up with 24 half square triangles. You will want to trim these and block them to 3.5 inches. I am going to unpress one of mine, because what I do with mine is I use the Quilt in a Day trimming ruler. So with this one, let me press that again, I wrinkled that. With this one, I take my 3.5 inch mark. That's the mark I want. That's what I want to trim it to. And I take my sewn line right here and I place that mark on the sewn line, not down at the bottom, on the sewn line. And then I trim it up to my 3.5 inches so that when I press, then I cut my dog ears, and then when I press open, my block is already nice and trimmed up. If you have a ruler like that, you love it, right? I bet you would say, "Oh, I love that ruler." There are other brands that have a similar idea to it. I just happen to have Quilt in the Day. I love Eleanor Burns, and I just happen to have her ruler. But you want all 24 of your half square triangles to be 3.5 inches to match the 3.5 inch D and E blocks that we cut earlier. That makes sense, right? So I'm going to lay out the very bottom row right now for you. Since it's hard to see the whole thing laid out because it's so large, I'm going to do this a row at a time. So I'm going to take my D block and I'm going to lay, make sure I only pick up one. I'm going to lay my D block to the far left, and then I'm going to take a half square triangle and lay it where my print is in the upper right and my solid is in the lower left. I'm going to take a second triangle and lay it so that my prints form this V shape. Now I'm going to take another triangle and place it so that my cream fabric forms the triangle. So what we're doing basically right now is forming our star points on the bottom. Well, this is the upper, sorry, this would be the upper row. And then I'm going to take another half square triangle and place it so that my patterned fabric forms another point. And then I'm going to take another D square and place it on the end. Now, let's see if I can get this up any farther so you can see that whole row. There you go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these two here and I'm going to fold this over on top of it and set it with that one. And then I'm going to take these two and fold it over on top of it and set it with this one. I'm going to take all of these now, both of these stacks, over to the sewing machine, and we're going to put these together. So if you need to check Just unfold, and you know you want your print to be forming that point. Line them right up. I'm using a 1/4 inch seam allowance on everything, which is kind of this, you could say, the industry standard on piecing for quilting. I am using another little product today. It's this seam roller. And the reason I'm using it is because I don't have my iron over here and I need to add my solid block to it. And I don't want to run back over to my sewing machine and run back. I want to be able to do this all in one place and then give it a good press at the end. So what I'm going to do is open that up. Yep, my points are together nicely there. Looks great. And I'm just going to give it a little bit of a roll here with this seam roller. Now, I press all of my seams to one side. You can certainly do them open if you prefer that method. I suggest if you do, though, that you do a smaller stitch length, like a 1.6, something like that. Now I've laid my solid square here, and I'm going to sew that to the end. Now I'm just going to set this aside for now, and I'm going to pick up my other set. Once again, my blues are together, great. Lining them all up. So this star block is made in rows, and then the rows are sewn together to form the full block. This is the 3rd star block in our August. August has kind of been our star block month. We had one that was not a star block, but the other 3 were. Press that, and I'm going to put this to the left side. Now I'm putting the solid on the left side. On the other one, I put it over here, but this time I want to make sure and put it to the left side. Okay, and I'm just going to flip it so that I can sew it. And it is important that you put it on that left side, otherwise you're going to end up with 2 blocks or 2 rectangles that match up this way. So you're not going to end up having that on the other side. I'll show you when we go back over to the camera. Okay. And trim. There we go. Now we'll go back over to the main. Whoops, hang on. I want to clip those threads. There we go. We're going to go back over to the main camera. Now we're going to press these out and then sew these 2 units together. So let me bring in my mat and flip my camera. All right, so we have here. So because I used the seam roller, I didn't put my pressing solution on here, but I'm going to do that right now to give that a really good, nice flat seam. Put that, my clapper on there. Now I'm going to flip my solid block over. And press. Put my clapper on there for a couple seconds. You don't have to leave it on a long time, just enough so it can absorb some of that heat. Now I have, this is the left side of that row. I'll set that aside. And I'll do the right side. Put my clapper on here. All right. Now, my left side and my right side. So I have two of my prints facing inward. My star points are all facing upward and my solid blocks at the end. And I'm going to go and sew these two together really quickly. We'll just line all of those up with the camera. There we go. I'm using my walking foot. I know exactly where my 1/4 inch is with my walking foot. You could also use a 1/4 inch piecing foot. I have one of those and I use that a lot as well. And we're going to flip our camera again. Now we have these two rectangle units together. I'm going to prep the seam. Flip this nicely open. Give it a press. Put my clapper on for a second. I'm not pressing down hard. I'm just holding it there. There we go. Now, this will end up being, I'm turning this so you can see it as if you're looking to the top. This will be your top row. Okay. Just going to set that to the side. Now we're going to lay out the second row, and it starts with a 1/2 square triangle. And in this one, the 1/2 square triangle, the cream color or your solid, which was your A fabric, is going to be in your upper right corner and your print in the bottom left corner. Then we're going to take one of our solid E blocks and lay it right there. Then we're going to take another one of our 1/2 square triangles and we're going to lay it so that the cream or what was the A fabric is in the upper left and the print is in the lower right. We'll take another 1/2 square triangle and we're going to put them together so that, again, just like we did in our other row, our print fabric is making this triangle. Then we're going to take another one of our E blocks, our solid E blocks. Make sure I just have one there. And we're going to take another 1/2 square triangle with the cream in the upper left and the print in the lower right. Okay. Now we'll put these two together. We'll put these two together. And we'll put these two together. Now, so that I remember what side I have to sew on between now and my sewing machine, I'm just putting a little pin on the edge. I'm going to take it out before I sew because I'm not like using it to hold it together or measuring it or anything. This is just helping me to remember what edge I sew on, because in all honesty, I can get confused between here and my sewing machine, which is like 5 feet. Okay, so here is our first set. Take my pin out. I have 2 matching pin cushions in size and shape. One is purple, one is blue. As I fill up this one, I take it over to the table and bring the empty one that's over at the table back over here, and I just swap them in and out. It makes it easier than trying to always grab my pin cushion and remember to bring it with me if I'm using it. Okie doke. I'm chain piecing these sets. Once I take the pin out and I know what side I'm going to sew on, then I just get everything nice and lined up. and our last set for this row. See, this is not hard at all, just straight stitches. I would say that your more complicated part, the half square triangles, which is really simple, is already completed. Half square triangles are basically the basic block of quilting other than just a solid square. All right, so now I'm going to trim these apart and I'm going to open this one up. Give it a little seam roll there. You could do that with your fingers. You could do a good seam there. I'm really bad at it, so I don't. Okay, so that's going to end up being over here. Just making sure I have them together properly. I'm going to grab my finished block. I want to make sure that I put these together properly for the second row, so that there's no seam ripping. And now I know I haven't because my solids are in the wrong place. So this one goes here. Okay. Roll my seam a little bit and we'll press these out when we go back over. So that goes there and that has my solid. Then I have this set that has my points right here. So we're going to go ahead and put those together and sew them together. So all I can say is if you get confused or turned around in your piecing sometimes, is figure out, it's like figuring out a rhyme or what they call a mnemonic that helps you remember things in a certain order. Now I'm going to put this one on. Is that right? Yeah, this one is right here. And all that is, it's a rhyme or a technique or something that helps you to remember how to do something. So for me, putting those pins on the edge that I have to sew on is kind of like that type of a device. It kind of helps me to remember as I'm walking over where I'm actually sewing those two blocks together. And that system may work for you, or you could choose any system that does work for you. There really is absolutely no right or wrong for how you do that. Just do whatever works for you, so that you don't get confused and have to do a lot of ugly seam ripping. Alrighty, we're gonna go ahead and do our pressing on this row. So I'm gonna go ahead and flip this one out here. And I'm going to go ahead now and do this one. The precision piecing pen product is not necessary. I mean, it's not, a requirement by any means, but I just find it really helps to give you a lovely flat seam. There are other techniques that help you get a lovely flat seam too. Some people, that is why some people will press their seams open. I find that to be dicey for me. Let's just say that. Because does it make a weaker seam? Yes, it absolutely does. Scientifically, as a scientist, I can tell you it makes a weaker seam. That's why using a smaller stitch length actually helps. It actually reinforces that seam because there's more stitches there and it's less likely to open up. So, open seams, if that's what you like, that's perfectly okay. And even the very few times, like when I do the 3-inch blocks, I will open those seams, especially at my points. I still always use that, even if I'm going to open a seam. I find it helps even those little seams to lay down better. All right, so we're going to bring in our first row, and here is our second row. Just want to make sure I'm laying it out properly. Yep. All righty, so here's this row. So we have the top and the second row now. And I'm just going to lay the second row on top of the first row and lay that back to the side. Now we're going to do this is where this block gets a little interesting. Can we use those words? I think that's okay. So we want to take 4 half square triangles. 2 of them you want to put together so that you have a blue or your print as your point. On the other 2, you want to put them together so that you have your cream as your point. And you want to do that with 4 more squares. So you want to do another one that is with your blues together, and another set that is with your creams together or your solids together. So I'm going to flip these over. Now I know those are going to go down that side, and these are going to go down my print side. I think I can remember that while I go over to the sewing machine. No promises. And we're going to sew these sets together. So we have 2 where we're sewing together the solid in the center to make the solid color as the point. And our second set, and you can always open them up, make sure you've got everything right where you want it to be before you sew. There are no rules. Check it as often as you want, as many times as you want. Go back and look at your pattern again if you want, whatever is helpful for you. Okay, there I have my blue ones together. Because although, as I always say, quilting is an art of precision, it's also an art. You notice that word came first, that it's an art. And artists, which is what you are as a quilter, you're an artist. We all have some of our own ways of doing things. And as long as we get to the place where we want to be with our quilts and our stitching, then no one should be telling you, oh, you did that wrong. Because no artists do things exactly the same way. Alrighty, so we have all of those 4 sets sewn together. We're going to come over and press these now. Flip our camera. And I'm going to, one more time, I'm going to cut my sets apart. And press these. I'm just going to set it over there and put the clapper on it. Every time I say the clapper, I think of the clap on, clap off, the clapper, the thing that would turn your lights on and off. Back in the, what was it? Back in the 70s, probably. I think they were around even longer than that. And Set that one over there. Now I'm going to do the same thing with my other two sets. But that song runs through my head. Clap on the clapper. And then, so this is probably really dating me, but what then pops into my head are Chia Pets. Do you all remember Chia Pets? That is aging me a little bit, I know, but I start thinking about Chia Pets because those commercials always tended to come on at the same time. Okay. All right, so now I want to get this, the big block, the 6.5-inch square. Now you're going to see why we did these sets first, because this is 6.5 inches, right? So a 3.5-inch, we have to kind of sew these together a little differently. So what we want to do is take our two that have the printed point and set them on each side of our large block, just like that. And then we're going to take our ones with the white points and set them so that the solid matches the solid points here and matches the solid points there. So you're kind of doing a double row here as far as height wise because of this square. Okay, that's why we did these, and now we're doing the row together. So I'm going to now, and these, you have seams that are right there together. I try to get my seams to line up there when I'm sewing, but you're not matching up a point there. So if it's not right on the money, don't worry about it. Don't freak out about it in any way, shape, or form. I do put a double-headed pin there. It just kind of holds them together in that spot a little bit better. And I'll do the same thing with this set over here. And then that also tells me exactly, and your seams nest together. That will also tell me exactly what side I'm going to sew on. So this time the pinning is doing a little bit of a double duty. And I like these double stemmed pins for putting my seams together. We'll go back over to the sewing machine. Oh gosh, let me see if I've lined this back up. The camera just went kind of weird there. It tipped right over. There, I think that's okay. Yeah, that's good. Okay. Oh, excuse me. I've got that first pin out. I never, ever, under any circumstance, sew over my pins. It's so super dangerous. I can't force you not to do it, but wow, it's dangerous. I don't bet in Las Vegas either, so that's a whole nother story. I tend to get very competitive when we play games. And if I went to Las Vegas, I would end up losing my home because I don't know when to say no and stop when it comes to games. Alrighty, we have our two sets sewn together. Whoops. There we go. So now I'm going to clip these, and I'm going to do the same thing I did before with the little seam roller. Open this up. Yeah, that looks nice. Okay. I'm just going to kind of give it a little press open. Do the same thing to the other one. Yep, I like how that looks too. Okay. So now I'm going to bring in my big block, and I know that I want my prints to match up. So I'm going to flip this over line up my edges. And away we go. Trim all my threads. I was using a fabric earlier today. Oh my goodness, was it shredding on me, you know, fraying everywhere. I have little threads just everywhere. If you saw this shirt I'm wearing, you would think I was growing threads because it was just crazy. Okay, now we're gonna do this. We're going to go back and press this row, this kind of double row, I guess you can call it, because it's double high, right? It's double the height. Okay. All right. So I'm going to do some seam conditioning there. And I'm going to do some seam conditioning there. So I have all of them to one side. And I'll press. I've noticed I've done both of these blocks in blues and creams. I really love these colors together. This blueprint fabric and this one, well, both of them. The one that's finished and this one, I just love the fabric. This blue fabric here is from a collection called Flowers for Freya. I can give you some more details on that because I kept my salvage. Flowers for Freya by Lindsay Cull McCrae. It's a Moda fabric. Okay. And I know it's available because I haven't had that one very long. And then I must apologize, this kind of a taupey cream. It was one of the ones in my box of whitish fabrics that I keep all of those in for backgrounds. And I honestly don't know. I suspect it's either a Kona or a Bella solid. And it could be a Riley Blake, maybe. I'm not really sure. I just don't remember. So I do apologize for that. And I will tell you that on this one, this fabric right here is from Kimberbell Designs. It's one of her basics. And the cream is also a Kimberbell Silky Solid. So if you're interested in any of those fabrics, you get them. Now, what I'm going to do with this one, since it's right in the center, I'm going to go ahead and trim up my edges. I always trim up a little bit of my edges. Even though they look pretty good and all, there's always a few little threads that just do better if you get them trimmed off and everything is nice and straight. You can get any part that's fraying off. And sometimes it's literally just threads that you're trimming, but it can make the difference. It really can. All right, so now we have over half of our block put together. So there is our center. There is the second row that we made. There's the first row that we made. So now what you're going to do with your last two rows is the same thing that we did for the first two rows. So let me bring in our whole block again. Okay. So your top, let's see, I still can't see the whole thing. Let's bring this down, I guess. The top 2 rows and the bottom 2 rows match. And then the only one that is different, oops, let me flip that over, is this center row here that is double high because of that center block. And after you have all those rows together, you just sew your rows together. I sew the top 2 together, and then I sew them onto the center one. I sew the bottom 2 together and sew that unit onto the center one. And then I just press it, press it, press it. And yes, I use steam. I know some people don't like to use steam. That's fine, but there's really nothing wrong with it. Some people like to use starch. That's okay. Some people like to use Best Press or another spray alternative. My spray alternative of choice is Magic Sizing. I use the extra crisp because I really don't find it to be overly crisp by any means. But I really like this. This I can find at the grocery store, and I can order it by the case from Amazon. That's my starch alternative of choice. So after you get your whole block together, press it, seam it, turn it over, or press it or steam it, turn it over, press out all of your seams, make sure everything is good. And then your block is ready to go. And you can, like I said before, you can either put this, oops, let me flip one more time. You can either put this in a quilt. So at 18 inches, 2 of them are going to give you 36 inches. That's a great size for a baby quilt, okay? Or if you do 4 of them, 2 and 2, it's a great size for a wall hanging. But if you did 3 of these and 3 rows, so that would be 9 total, you'd have a great throw for your sofa or for a guest bedroom, anything like that. Or you could take 3 of these because of the size and put them 3 in a row vertically, and you would have a great table runner, a beautiful, huge table runner, or a beautiful runner for the bottom of a bed. That could be really beautiful. If you're trying to add that last little bit of home decor accent to a new bedroom set, find some colors that kind of match the bed linens that you've chosen and make those 3 together, maybe 4, but I think 3 is going to be plenty. And sew them in a vertical way, then do your quilting and your binding and have a beautiful bed skirt, and just give that new bedroom set that little bit of oomph. And everybody, when they see it, are going to go, oh, wow, and you made that. They're going to love it. All righty. Thank you so much for joining me this week at the Quilting Library. I hope to see you again next week when we sew another new block and take a look. Oh, I should let you know, actually, next week is the 5th Monday in August. And when I did the preview, I only did 4 blocks because 4 blocks a month, that's how I'm planning it. So because this coming Monday is the 5th Monday, there's going to be a little bonus block, okay? So you can look for that this coming Monday. Have a great week, everyone. Go sew the world beautiful. Bye now.